Have you ever found yourself in a situation where you realize that the world around you, the rules, the norms, the very fabric of society isn't quite what you thought it was?
Hmm.
It's governed not just by, visible laws and rulers, but by something far more subtle, more pervasive.
Yeah, absolutely.
Things like, say, public health campaigns, or the latest economic data that guides policy, or even the really personal choices we make about how we live our lives. What we eat, how we exercise, how we chase happiness.
It's a complex idea, definitely. And it can be challenging, but understanding it or trying to really does shift how you see power, society, maybe even yourself.
And Foucault's work, Michel Foucault, he offers such a unique lens for this, doesn't he? Even if it's, dense sometimes.
Oh, absolutely. It requires some thoughtful engagement for sure. But it's unsettling in a good way, maybe. He pushes us to reconsider what seems obvious, to look beneath the surface of how power actually operates.
Right, not just power as this big thing imposed from above.
Exactly.
Mm.
But as something woven into the very structures of our daily existence. Subtle. Pervasive.
And that's exactly what we want to do today. We're diving deep into the core ideas from Foucault's lectures, specifically the Birth of Biopolitics.
Mm-hmm.
Our mission here isn't just to, explain Foucault chapter and verse. It's more about pulling out the most important insights, those nuggets of knowledge that might surprise you.
And connecting them, right? Because his work is so interconnected.
Precisely. Connecting these ideas from biopolitics to his broader thinking, power, knowledge, discipline, sexuality, the idea of the self, all these fascinating threads.
The goal really is to help you, our listeners, become genuinely well-informed about these subtle, often invisible forces shaping our world.
And maybe even how you navigate it all. So for this deep dive, where are we drawing our insights from?
Well, we're going straight to the source, primarily Foucault's own texts. We've meticulously pulled from his lecture series at the Collège de France, especially, of course, The Birth of Biopolitics.
Yep.
But we're also weaving in key concepts from his other major works. Think Discipline and Punish, The Birth of the Clinic, The History of Sexuality. And we'll touch on some related historical and philosophical analyses that help illuminate his framework.
So it's grounded in his words, his interpretations.
Absolutely. We want to capture the nuance of his, often groundbreaking ideas.
All right, let's get into it. The Birth of Biopolitics. Foucault isn't just talking about a simple change in government policy here, is he?
No, not at all. He's pointing to something much more fundamental, a profound shift, almost a revolution, in the very reason for governing, the rationality of government.
A conceptual change.
Exactly. One that quietly started emerging back in the 18th century, and it really transformed the foundation of how we are governed today.
So what was it like before? What was the old model?
Well, if you go back before, say, the mid-18th century, the dominant logic was what Foucault calls reason of state, or raison d'etat.
Raison d'etat.
This was a system where sovereign power, think of the king, the monarch, directly controlled people and things. Very hands-on.
How so? Give us an example.
Imagine a monarch imposing taxes by decree, commanding armies, intervening directly in subjects' lives through sheer force or law. Power was centralized, it was visible, often quite brutally manifested.
Like the public executions we've talked about before in relation to his other work, that spectacle of punishment.
Precisely. That's a prime example of raison d'etat in action. It was, as Foucault put it, a policy of terror, a raw manifestation of force.
Designed to show the sovereign's absolute power.
Exactly. To make everyone acutely aware of the sovereign's unrestrained presence. But then things start to shift. Almost imperceptibly at first.
Towards what?
Towards what Foucault calls the reason of the least state. It's a bit counterintuitive sounding.
The least state, does that mean less government?
Not exactly less, but different. Under this new governmental reason, that direct, immediate intervention by the government starts to recede, or at least change its form. It doesn't aim for that absolute direct hold on everything anymore.
So it governs differently. Through a different principle.
Yes, and this is where it gets really fascinating. Under this new logic, government intervention becomes legitimate. It finds its justification in law and reason only insofar as it relates to interest.
Interest, like economic interest.
Primarily, yes, but it's broader too. It's a profound reorientation. The government acts, or is seen as right to act, only when the interplay of interests makes something an individual, a thing, a good, a process of interest to individuals or to the collective.
Okay, unpack that a bit. How does interest become the trigger for government action?
Think about it like this. The state starts to step back from direct command and instead focuses on facilitating or regulating an environment where interests can sort of spontaneously play out.
Like setting up the rules of the game, maybe?
Kind of. And through the interaction of all these individual interests, people pursuing wealth, safety, whatever certain desired outcomes are expected to emerge, the state then only steps in, legitimately, if that interplay of interests starts to cause problems, or if it needs to be guided towards a collective good.
So it's less do this and more let's manage the conditions so that you'll likely do this.
Exactly. It's a move towards managing an environment rather than directly managing people's actions all the time.
And Foucault identifies a key figure at the heart of this new logic, right? Homo economicus.
Yes, Homo economicus, or economic man. And this isn't just some abstract term from an economics textbook for Foucault.
No.
He traces its roots much deeper back to intellectual currents that actually predate famous economists like Walras or Pareto. It's about the historical emergence of a specific way of seeing human beings.
As what? As fundamentally driven by economic calculation.
Primarily, yes. Not necessarily as subjects of law first or moral beings first, but as beings who calculate, who respond to incentives, who pursue their interests in a, well, broadly economic way.
And what's really crucial here, you mentioned, is that this subject of interest isn't the same as the traditional legal subject.
That's a key distinction Foucault makes. This homo economicus, this subject of interest, cannot be simply reduced to the juridical will, the person defined by rights, obligations, contracts under the law.
They operate differently, on a different plane.
Exactly. Foucault contrasts the logic of the market with the logic of the contract to illustrate this.
Okay, so contract, that's explicit, right? Written down, agreed upon, legal consequences if you break it.
Precisely. It's about intentional agreement, formal promises, conscious assent to terms. Very defined.
But the market.
The market, in Foucault's analysis here, operates more on that spontaneous, often implicit interplay of interests. It's not about everyone signing a contract for every transaction.
Right. Prices emerge. Supply meets demand.
Coordination and order emerge from the sum total of countless individual pursuits, often without direct, conscious agreement on the overall outcome. And importantly, for this new governmental reason, the market is seen as a sphere of truth.
Truth. How so?
Because it reveals what individuals actually do, what they actually value, through their actions and choices, driven by their interests. So the government can observe the market to understand reality and then calibrate its interventions based on that revealed truth.
Interesting. So the market tells the government what's really going on.
In this particular logic, yes. It becomes a site of verification for governmental practice.
And this leads to the second big innovation Foucault identifies, the relationship between this economic subject and political power itself.
Right. How does the state relate to this homo economicus? You see this shift embodied in thinkers like Condorcet, but especially famously in Adam Smith.
The invisible hand.
Exactly. Smith's concept of the invisible hand is maybe the most iconic expression of this new logic.
Remind us how that works again.
The idea is that individuals pursuing their own self-interest within a free market unintentionally end up promoting the good of society as a whole, as if guided by an
invisible hand.
Right. And this makes direct, heavy-handed state intervention seem less necessary, maybe even counterproductive. Order and prosperity can just emerge naturally from individual actions.
The invisibility of the governing force is key here, isn't it?
It really is. Power becomes diffused, less centralized. It operates through these seemingly natural economic processes rather than explicit commands. It's subtle. Smith, interestingly, identified labor, actual toil and time, as a kind of fundamental principle for wealth, grounding it in human finitude.
So it's grounded in the reality of human effort, not just abstract desires.
Yeah, exactly. It shifts economic thought towards the concrete conditions of existence.
So the state manages the environment for these interests, fostering this self-regulating order. And this connects to another really radical concept Foucault explores: society as enterprise.
Yes, especially as articulated by the Ordo Liberals.
Ordo Liberals.
Yeah.
Were they?
A German school of economic and social thought, mostly active in the early to mid-20th century. They were very critical of excessive state intervention in the economy, what they saw as the flaws of both laissez-faire and planned economies.
And Foucault found their ideas significant.
Very. He describes them launching a fine scathing attack on the traditional state economy. They advocated for market mechanisms not just as an economic tool, but as a fundamental organizing principle for society itself.
For society, not just the economy.
That's the crucial step. They argued that a strong, free economy required a certain kind of society, and that the state's role was to actively create and maintain the framework for competition and market principles to flourish throughout society.
So it's not just about taxes and trade, it's shaping the whole social fabric using economic principles.
Pretty much. This is where the idea of Gesellschaftspolitik, or policy of society, comes in. Government isn't just tinkering with the economy, it's actively using economic logic and levers to shape social life, social norms, everything.
Wow. So society itself becomes the target.
It becomes the primary point of application for governmental interventions, as Foucault puts it. It's less about controlling specific individual actions, more about creating an environment, almost like tending a garden, that encourages certain outcomes and behaviors.
And this leads to the idea of society modeled on an enterprise, a business.
That's the radical endpoint, yes. Formalizing society on the model of the enterprise.
What does that even mean in practice?
It means thinking of citizens as, well, economic actors, investing in their human capital, education, health, managing their lives like personal enterprises, and seeing the social body itself as a kind of vast, interconnected corporation.
You hear echoes of that today, right? Personal branding, investing in yourself.
Absolutely. Foucault suggests that this enterprise society and what he calls judicial society, society structured by law, are really two faces of a single phenomenon. The economic and legal frameworks become deeply intertwined in shaping how we live and what's expected of us.
And within this ordo-liberal thought, Foucault highlights a distinction made by W. Eucken.
Yes. You can differentiate between regulatory actions and organizing actions. It's a subtle but important distinction.
Okay, what's the difference?
Regulatory actions are about setting the rules of the game. Think antitrust laws, contract enforcement, creating a level playing field for competition.
Like the umpire in baseball you said earlier.
Kinda, yeah. Whereas organizing actions are more fundamental. They structure the actual social and economic environment itself. It's not just setting rules, it's designing the stadium, influencing who gets to play, shaping the conditions within which competition happens.
So it's much deeper than just rules. It's actively constructing the framework.
Exactly. It's about shaping the entire social field to encourage certain behaviors, often without explicit commands. It's a much more subtle, pervasive form of governance.
But even within this tradition, there were warnings, right? You mentioned W. Ropke.
Yes, Ropke, another influential ordo-liberal, offered a crucial caution. He argued that while competition is useful, even necessary for order within the market economy, it is not a principle on which you can build an entire society. He warned that if competition isn't embedded within a sound political and moral framework, if it just takes over everything,
Then what?
then it becomes dangerous. It can act as a social explosive, corroding social bonds, trust, and other essential human values that aren't purely economic.
That's a really important tension. Even proponents saw the potential downsides of letting economic logic dominate everything.
It shows the inherent complexities and contradictions within this mode of thought itself.
Okay, so this paints a picture of a major shift in governance. Now, how did Foucault himself analyze this? What were his tools? Let's talk about his method genealogy.
Genealogy is absolutely fundamental to understanding Foucault. He lays it out in works like The Archaeology of Knowledge. He really objected to traditional historical approaches.
How so? What didn't she like?
He was critical of historians who focused on grand narratives, evolution, progress, the spirit of the age, these big unifying concepts. He felt they overemphasized continuity and kind of smoothed over the rough edges of history.
The breaks, the disruptions.
Exactly. He wasn't interested in a smooth story. He focused on discontinuity and disruption. He wanted to understand the messy, contingent, often accidental ways that new forms of thinking, new practices, new ways of governing actually emerged, how and why something came to be, not just telling a linear story about it.
So looking for ruptures, unexpected turns, things that fundamentally change the game.
Precisely. And this ties directly into his concept of problematization.
Problematization, we heard that earlier. What does it mean again?
It became really central in his later work on ethics and governmentality. It's essentially about how certain aspects of human existence, things that might have been ignored or just taken for granted before, suddenly become objects of thought, objects of concern, things that need to be managed or intervened upon.
So it's not about solving existing problems.
Not exactly. It's about understanding how something madness, crime, sex, health, poverty, whatever came to be seen as a problem in the first place. What were the historical conditions, the shifts in knowledge, the political necessities that made it possible, even necessary, to think about and act upon that specific issue as a problem requiring intervention?
How did we start talking about it this way?
Exactly. How did it enter discourse and practice as something to be governed?
And this whole genealogical method, it owes a lot to Nietzsche, right?
Oh, massively. Foucault was very open about Nietzsche's influence, particularly his idea of wirklich history, actual history, sometimes translated as effective history.
And how is that different from regular history?
Well, unlike traditional history that might seek origins or universal truths, Nietzsche's actual history deliberately refuses the certainty of absolutes. It doesn't look for comforting narratives.
What does it do instead?
It distinguishes, separates, and distorts. It actively looks for divergence, for the marginal elements, the things that don't fit the neat story. It aims to dismantle established notions, not to find foundations for them.
So it's critical. It pulls things apart.
Very much so. Foucault called its use genealogical uses and described them as strictly anti-Platonic, meaning it's not searching for some eternal truth or ideal form behind things. It's looking at the messy, power-laden historical processes that produce what we take to be true or real or natural.
History as a scalpel, you said.
And
Dissecting the present.
that's a great way to put it. It's a tool for critique, for revealing how the things we take for granted are actually historical constructs shaped by power. It questions the very idea of a fixed human nature or a predetermined historical path.
A powerful lens. And this connects directly to another core Foucault concept, power knowledge. Power seems like such an enigma, but Foucault says it's everywhere.
Right. He famously said power remains a total enigma, partly because it's not something easily possessed like an object. It's not just held by a ruling class or exercised only through commands or violence.
But where is it then?
He argues it's ubiquitous, it's everywhere, it's present and hidden, and crucially, it's always exercised in a particular direction. It's relational,
Relational meaning.
meaning it exists in the relationships between people, between institutions, within discourses. It's not a thing someone has, but something that circulates, that operates throughout the social body. He suggests it's often easier to see who lacks power than to pinpoint exactly who holds it.
Like a current running through society.
That's a good analogy. And knowledge isn't separate from this current. It's intrinsically linked. Power knowledge. One concept.
How are they linked? How does knowledge relate to power?
Foucault makes this explicit in his lectures on the will to know. He says something quite provocative, that the apparatus of knowledge is organized not for knowledge, but for mastery over things.
Wow. Not for knowledge, but for mastery.
Yes, it's a crucial insight. It means that specific forms of knowledge, think economic science, medical statistics, psychology, sociology, aren't just neutral ways of observing the world.
They're tools.
They become integral tools for exercising power, especially in a biopolitical regime. They help categorize people, measure populations, identify deviations, and justify interventions. They produce a certain kind of reality that can then be governed.
So when we count people or categorize illnesses or measure economic output,
We're not just understanding, we're creating the very categories and objects that power can then work upon. We're simplifying reality in order to manage it.
which leads to that really provocative idea about truth, that truth is non-true.
Yes, in an ontological sense. He's suggesting there's no ultimate foundational truth that exists outside of its historical and discursive formation. Truth, as we understand and operate with it, is often an effect of power relations.
An effect of power.
It's produced within specific systems of power knowledge. So struggles over what counts as knowledge, what counts as truth, say, between different scientific theories or different economic models, are fundamentally struggles about power.
Because defining truth means defining reality, and defining reality gives you leverage to act.
Precisely. To make certain claims about what is true is to exert a certain kind of power over how we perceive the world and how we act within it. It reminds us that facts are never truly neutral. They always exist within a framework shaped by power.
Okay, shifting focus slightly. Foucault didn't just look at these large-scale shifts. He also analyzed how power works on a micro level, on individual bodies, through discipline.
Yes, discipline and punish is the classic text here. It completely reframed how many people think about prisons, but also schools, hospitals, factories.
He details that historical shift away from public torture.
Right, away from that spectacular sovereign power we talked about earlier, the policy of terror, the manifestation of force.
Towards imprisonment, which seems more humane, maybe.
Well, Foucault argues it wasn't simply a move towards humanity, though it was often framed that way. He saw the rise of the prison as a deliberate colonization of the penalty,
Colonization of the penalty.
meaning imprisonment, which was once marginal, became the dominant systematic form of punishment, precisely because it offered new, more efficient ways to control and transform individuals.
Transform them, not just punish them.
Exactly. The goal wasn't just retribution. It was to produce docile and useful individuals, to reshape them from within.
How did prisons and these other disciplinary institutions like schools or factories actually do that?
Through what Foucault calls apparatuses, designed for precise work upon their bodies. This involved constant observation, surveillance, detailed scheduling, breaking down tasks, ranking individuals.
But like military drills or assembly lines.
Very much so. And meticulous registration and recording, creating files, tracking progress, building up a body of knowledge about each individual. It's all about optimizing their capabilities, normalizing their behavior, making them predictable, efficient, useful.
And he argued these techniques weren't invented for the prison, but were already developing elsewhere.
Yes, procedures for distributing people in space, classifying them, extracting maximum time and force, training bodies, coding behavior, ensuring visibility. These were developing across society and then coalesced in the model prison.
You found that incredible, almost chilling example in the sources, the steam machine for correction.
Ah, yes. It's such a vivid illustration of this disciplinary ambition, advertised in the 18th century.
For correcting children.
Yes, specifically for lazy, greedy, disobedient, rebellious, chattering, irreligious children, and so on. It promised cheapness of correction and surprising effects.
A steam machine. Seriously.
Apparently, parents were urged to use it. Incorrigible kids could even be boarded and fed bread and water once subjected to its regimen.
That's disturbing. But it shows the goal, right?
Exactly. It exemplifies the ambition to shape behavior through precise, seemingly scientific mechanical methods, to transform difficult subjects into docile, useful citizens who conform to norms. It's a shift from punishing a crime to correcting a character.
And this focus on the individual body, on discipline and normalization, this lays the groundwork for biopolitics.
Absolutely. They're fundamentally connected. Two sides of the same coin, really.
How so? What's the connection?
Think of it this way. Discipline works on the individual body, making it productive, obedient, normalizing it. Biopolitics scales this up. It targets the population as a whole.
The population as a biological entity.
Yes. Managing the life of the species. Birth rates, death rates, health, longevity, sickness, public hygiene, demographics. Discipline creates the manageable individual. Biopolitics manages the healthy, productive, optimized population.
So they work together. Controlling the individual makes it easier to manage the population, and managing the population requires certain kinds of individuals.
Precisely. There are two interconnected technologies of modern power that emerged around the same time and reinforce each other, aimed at optimizing both the individual and the collective body.
Okay, so we've traced this path from sovereign power to market logic to discipline to biopolitics. Now let's look at how Foucault connects these to things like medicine, sexuality, and even how we think about ourselves, the care of the self, starting with the medical gaze.
Right. In The Birth of the Clinic, Foucault analyzes how what he calls the medical gaze emerged, again around the 18th century, as a really powerful new form of power knowledge.
It's more than just doctors looking at patients.
Much more. It represented a new carving up of things, a whole new way of seeing, speaking about, and practicing medicine. Medical discourse became a positive science.
Based on observation.
Yes, but a specific kind of observation. Doctors were trained to see and categorize disease in an empirical, localized, and ultimately governable way. It structured observation to produce knowledge that power could then use.
And you mentioned that subtle shift in questioning from what is the matter with you to where does it hurt?
Yes, it seems small, but it signals a huge conceptual shift.
How?
What is the matter with you? Allows for a broader story. Social factors, emotions, the patient's whole life. Where does it hurt? Focuses attention sharply on the physical body, on a specific location, a lesion, something observable and measurable.
The body as a map of symptoms.
Exactly. A surface to be read, an object to be analyzed through its tangible signs. It moves away from subjective experience towards verifiable empirical data.
And this medical gaze didn't stay confined to the individual bedside. It expanded.
Massively. The vision was for a generalized medical supervision. a network of gazes across society.
How would that work?
Through things like mandatory birth and death registrations, collecting detailed data on diseases, lifestyles, causes of death, creating this huge pathological map of the population. Also calls for medical topography, mapping regions based on housing, climate, diet, education, everything that might affect health.
Building a massive database on the population's health.
Precisely. Identifying patterns, risks, environmental factors, all in the name of managing collective health.
And you mentioned the strange idea that individual pain should become a spectacle. Why?
It's one of the more striking aspects. The logic was that the illnesses of some should be transformed into the experience of others. Individual suffering becomes collective knowledge.
For the greater good.
That was the justification. If you refused to let your illness be studied, documented, used for teaching, you were seen as ungrateful, as not contributing back to the society whose benefits you enjoyed. Your body, your pain, becomes a public resource, data for managing the population's health.
That reframes illness completely. And how did the understanding of disease and death change, too?
They became scientific tools in a way. Disease shifted from being seen as these external essences attacking the body to being understood as internal processes, complex movements of tissues, pathological forms of life itself. And death became the great analyst.
Great analyst.
Instead of just being the end, death, through practices like autopsy, became a crucial technical instrument for understanding life. It revealed the hidden workings of the body, the progression of disease, in a way that observing the living couldn't. Death provided truth for managing life.
Paradoxical. So medical knowledge, focused first on the individual body, becomes this powerful tool for managing population health, reproduction, lifespan governing life itself.
That's the biopolitical link, absolutely.
Yeah.
Using the science of life to administer the lives of populations, optimizing life on a mass scale.
Now let's turn to sexuality. How does something so seemingly private fit into Foucault's analysis of power?
Well, in the history of sexuality, Foucault argues that sex didn't just suddenly become repressed in the Victorian era, as the common story goes. Instead, it became intensely problematized. It became a central object of knowledge, moral concern, and techniques of management.
Problematized, meaning it became something to be talked about, studied, controlled.
Exactly. He looks back, for instance, at classical Greek thought, concepts like krasis, aphrodisian, the use of pleasures, and enkrateia, self-mastery.
These were important for the Greeks.
Crucial, especially for elite men. It wasn't about forbidding pleasure, but about using it wisely with moderation as part of governing oneself effectively. Being a good citizen, managing your household, required mastering your desires.
And marriage played a role.
Marriage was seen as the rational, natural context for sexual activity, mainly for procreation, ensuring the stability of the family and the city. Debauchery, or excessive indulgence, was problematic because it detached pleasure from this purpose and weakened self-control and civic standing. It was an ethical concern about managing oneself.
But this shifts, right, from this ethics of self-management.
Yes, Foucault traces a significant shift towards the juridification of sex, especially with the influence of Christian pastoral practices.
Juridification, meaning governed by laws and rules.
Exactly. External moral codes, religious laws, legal statutes start to dictate what's permitted or forbidden, even within marriage. Detailed rules about acts, intentions, thoughts. It moves from an internal ethics of self-cultivation to external regulation by codes and authorities.
And how does that connect to biopolitics?
Because regulating sexual activity, marriage, reproduction, moves beyond just individual morality. It becomes a key way to manage populations, their growth rate, their health. Think heredity, eugenics later on, the structure of the family, social order itself. Sexuality becomes this crucial hinge point, connecting the individual body and its desires to the management of the population as a whole.
It's a point where individual conduct directly impacts the collective.
Precisely. And finally, this all ties into Foucault's ideas about the cultivation of the self and how modern subjectivity, our very sense of being an individual, was formed.
How does our idea of self relate to power?
In The Care of the Self, he explores ancient practices of self-knowledge, stemming from that famous Greek maxim, know yourself. But for the ancients, this often involved testing procedures, exercise aimed at acquiring virtue, strengthening rational behavior, not necessarily uncovering guilt.
It's like Stoic practices. Journaling, reflection.
Exactly. Focus on improving future conduct, on wise behavior. But then Foucault traces how practices like the examination of conscience and confession evolved and became central techniques of the self.
techniques for finding the truth about oneself.
Yes, he shows how this evolved from philosophical self-reflection into Christian monastic precepts, where there was an intense obligation to confess all thoughts to a spiritual guide. Verbalization itself became a test of truth, a way to sort good from evil within.
This sounds very different from the Greek focus on behavior.
It is. It shifts towards uncovering a hidden inner truth, often linked to sin or desire. And this detailed self-examination, this imperative to confess and articulate the truth about oneself, Foucault argues, is foundational to modern subjectivity. We come to understand ourselves as individuals with hidden depths that need to be deciphered, expressed, categorized.
And how does this modern subject fit into biopolitics?
Because this subject, shaped by centuries of self-surveillance, self-examination, and confession, becomes inherently self-regulating.
Governing oneself.
In a way, yes. We internalize norms, monitor our own thoughts and behaviors, strive to align ourselves with what's considered healthy, normal, productive. We actively participate in our own governance, often without overt coercion.
So power doesn't always need to force us.
Exactly. The knowledge we produce about ourselves, through therapy, self-help, fitness tracking, whatever, becomes data that feeds back into the system. We become, in a sense, the Homo economicus managing our own life project, optimizing ourselves in ways that align with the broader biopolitical aims of managing the population. It's a subtle but incredibly effective form of power when the subject governs themselves according to the system's logic. Wow. Okay. That's a lot to take in. We've really journeyed through some complex territory today.
We certainly have.
So, to try and wrap this up, this deep dive into the birth of biopolitics, it really highlights a massive historical shift, doesn't it?
Absolutely. Foucault identifies this fundamental move away from the old sovereign power, whose logic was basically to take life or let live,
Right, the power over death.
to a new form of power, biopower, whose logic is almost the opposite, to make live or let die.
Focused on managing life.
Exactly. Managing populations, maximizing their health, their longevity, their productivity, optimizing life itself on a grand scale. And as we've explored, this isn't just one isolated thing. It's deeply woven together with all those other concepts Foucault analyzed.
Definitely. It's intertwined with disciplinary practices that shape individual bodies, making them docile and useful. It relies on the medical gaze and other forms of knowledge to measure and manage collective health. And it even connects to how we understand and regulate sexuality and how we've come to understand ourselves as subjects who practice care of the self.
All these threads forming this complex picture of how modern power operates, often invisibly, subtly, through managing life rather than just threatening death.
It's a challenging picture, but a powerful one for understanding the forces at play in our world.
So here's a final thought for you, our listeners, as you reflect on all this. Consider, how do these historical transformations in governance, moving from that visible spectacle of punishment to the invisible hand of the market, shifting from the individual body to the population's health, and from external commands to our own internalized self-regulation, how do these deep shifts still shape your everyday choices, your actions, even your sense of freedom right now?
And maybe ask yourself, what does it truly mean to be a subject of interest today, constantly encouraged to calculate, optimize, and manage your own life in a world increasingly shaped by statistics, data, and subtle pervasive norms?